Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Savannah Sellers. Joe's on assignment today. So you're just with me. We are going to begin our show at the White House, where President Trump has taken the unprecedented step of publicly revealing that he has authorized CIA action in Venezuela. The unusual remarks come days after the president said the U.S. carried out another strike on a small boat off the coast of Venezuela that he claimed was allegedly trafficking drugs, as I mentioned. 6 people on board the vessel were killed in what was the 5th strike on these types of boats ordered by the president. Speaking at an Oval Office event yesterday, the president said his administration was looking at expanding operations now on land, though, in Venezuela, and offered this explanation as to why he was sending in the CIA.
I authorized for 2 reasons, really. Number one, they have emptied their prisons into the United States of America. They came in through the they came in through the border. They came in because we had an open border policy. The other thing are drugs. We have a lot of drugs coming in from Venezuela. And a lot of the Venezuelan drugs come in through the sea, so you get to see that. But we're going to stop them by land also.
NBC News intelligence reporter Dan DeLuce joining us for more on this. Dan, good morning. So walk us through more of what we heard there from the president yesterday about these CIA operations in Venezuela. I know he was even asked whether Venezuela's President Maduro could be a target. Tell us about what we heard.
That's right. So the president was asked directly if he had authorized the CIA not only to take action in Venezuela, but to try to kill the leader of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, the leader of that regime. And here's what the president had to say to that.
Oh, I don't want to answer a question like that. That's a ridiculous question for me to be given. Not really a ridiculous question, but wouldn't it be a ridiculous question for me to answer? But I think Venezuela's feeling heat.
So that's how he answered that question. He didn't answer it directly. It was a bit coy, but this whole situation is just extraordinary because you have the amazing and unprecedented scene there where you have a president openly discussing covert action by the CIA in an adversarial country. So that could jeopardize, obviously, any planned operations or operations underway, could jeopardize the personnel. And the other thing former intelligence officials will say is it deprives the U.S. of being able to deny something that happens there, even if the U.S. isn't responsible.
Dan, we then did see the president of Venezuela come out on TV, condemn President Trump for these actions, for authorizing the CIA action. What did he say?
That's right. So he said he kind of appealed for diffusing tensions. He said, please, let's not have an escalation. He said no to regime change, yes for peace. He tried to sort of deliver a message directly to the people of the U.S. But he also issued orders to mobilize militia, the military, the police, to prepare to defend Venezuela in case there is some kind of U.S. action directly on Venezuelan soil. And of course, President Trump left open the possibility of strikes on Venezuelan territory, not just at sea. But for some time now, Venezuela has accused the U.S. of trying to pressure it and trying to topple the government there.
Dan, also, I mentioned this comes after the president ordered another strike on one of these alleged drug trafficking boats, video that our viewers have seen a few times now as it's happened multiple times. And you actually have some exclusive reporting here about how members of Congress are reacting to this. What do we know?
There's been a lot of dissatisfaction on the Hill, and both parties, the Republicans mainly express it privately, that the administration is not providing enough information about the intelligence underlying the strikes and also the legal argument, the legal reasoning why the U.S. has a legal right to be bombing boats in international waters instead of boarding the boats and trying to search them for narcotics. The other thing is lawmakers, including Republicans, are asking to see unedited video, classified video of these strikes, because some of the video being released is heavily edited, and they feel they need to get a fuller picture of what's going on. And you do have some Republicans privately expressing a lot of frustration about the lack of information they say that they're getting.
All right, Dan DeLuce, thank you so much for leading us off this hour. Well, sticking with the White House, a federal judge is now preventing the Trump administration from laying off federal workers amid the government shutdown. According to court filings, those layoffs already began last Friday when more than 4,000 federal workers were let go. Well, now this judge there in Northern California has granted a temporary restraining order to block those layoffs. It comes after two unions sued the administration over the reductions in force plan last month before this shutdown even began. Joining us now from Washington is NBC News White House correspondent Yamiche Alcindor. Yamiche, good morning. Great to see you. So the temporary restraining order went into effect immediately on Wednesday. What did the judge say about why those layoffs should be considered illegal specifically?
Well, good morning, Savannah. Essentially, what this federal judge in California is saying is that these layoffs need a pause for right now as this case moves through. So a temporary restraining order, as you said, was granted. I want to read to you part of the judge's decision, this California judge. They wrote in part, the Trump administration is taking advantage of the lapse in government spending and government functioning to assume that all bets are off. And as you said, there were two unions that sued once President Trump and Trump administration officials started talking about permanently laying people off from the federal government during a government shutdown, because usually people are furloughed, which means that they are taken and said don't go to work, or told not to go to work. They don't get paid, and then they usually get back pay. In this case, the Trump administration is going further than pretty much any administration we've seen in modern history, and they are now saying people are going to be permanently fired, not temporarily. So we'll have to see how this case moves through the courts.
Certainly. We also just mentioned this presser in the Oval Office yesterday. It's where the president really had this discussion about that CIA action in Venezuela that we were just talking about with Dan. Trump, though, was also joined by FBI Director Kash Patel to give an update on their law enforcement efforts, something called Operation Summer Heat. What were the highlights there? What did we learn about this action here at home?
Well, both President Trump and FBI Director Kash Patel really did double down on this idea that they believe the federal government is doing everything that they can to stop crime across cities and across different states. Of course, there's been a lot of criticism of the FBI and the way that federal forces have been used, but they are doubling down on this idea, and they put up some stats. These are from FBI Director Kash Patel. He says in the last 3 months, there have been 8,700 arrests, 2,200 seized firearms, 2,100 indictments, 221 kilograms of seized fentanyl, and 45,000 kilograms of seized cocaine. The president also notably in that press conference was taking questions and doubled down on the idea that it is right to have these strikes that have been very controversial on the waters. He said that he's targeting cartels coming from Venezuela to try to bring drugs into the United States. And he also left the door open for land strikes. So the president saying he thinks that he has now the seas sort of under control and that he has to move to a next phase, which could be strikes on land. Savannah.
Also, Yamiche, over the weekend on Saturday, millions of people are expected to participate in the latest No Kings protests across the country. That's what they're called. It comes, though, against the backdrop of clashes over these ICE operations, of what we were hearing about from the FBI director and President Trump. What are we hearing about how law enforcement is preparing to react to these protests, and what has the White House said here?
It's a good question. What we know is that there is going to be thousands of people, expected to be thousands of people gathering across the country. This banner of No Kings started under the first Trump administration and has continued now into the second Trump administration. We're expecting gatherings in places like New York, Portland, major cities. And the White House and Trump administration officials have really been negative and criticizing these protests. Some people have been saying that no kings means no paychecks. That was the Treasury Secretary. Some people have also been accusing them of being pro-Hamas, which the organizers pushed back on. They said they're really pro-Palestinian and they just want civilians not to be killed in this war that hopefully will be over. And then they also talked about the idea that this could be something, a gathering of sort of domestic terrorists. So the White House and federal officials have been saying that they're going to really be very clear that law enforcement will be taking any actions needed to protect citizens, to protect federal buildings. So it is a case where, of course, we've heard the president say over and over again that he sees some cities as out of control and that they really need federal forces. Of course, we've seen some Democratic governors and city officials push back on that. But it's going to be something to watch very closely. How big do these protests get and how much law enforcement is needed to control them, and what that control looks like is going to be a big question this weekend.
It certainly is. We know you'll be watching. Yamiche Alcindor with a gorgeous Washington, D.C. sunrise behind her. Thank you very much. Well, let's stay in Washington this morning. The Senate is scheduled to vote on a bill that will fund the Pentagon and make sure members of the military get paid. Of course, this is as the government is shut down. Senators expected to vote for the 10th time on a short-term spending bill that would immediately reopen reopen the government. For more, let's bring in NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Melanie Zanona with the latest. Mel, good morning. So let's start with these votes. The Senate is planning this 10th attempt to pass that short-term spending bill. Has anything changed either in the bill or among the parties or any particular lawmakers that you think might jump sides here or anything like this that has you hopeful that it will pass, or we got the same conversation as yesterday?
Well, I'm sorry to say that there has been zero movement towards ending this shutdown. And in fact, not a single senator has changed their vote on these bills since the shutdown began. And we're not expecting anything differently today. They're going to vote again on this GOP stopgap spending bill. And then they're going to go home for the weekend, which is essentially going to guarantee that the shutdown now goes into yet another week. And in fact, Democrats are now adding new demands in addition to their demands that they address health care before they fund the government. Now, Democrats want assurances from the Trump administration that those layoffs that Yamiche was talking about are going to be reversed if they agree to reopen the government. Of course, that federal judge did temporarily block the layoffs yesterday. But Democrats are very concerned about how this is all going to play out. And so now they're saying, in addition to health care, we want some assurances on those federal layoffs as well.
Mel, let's talk about this separate plan to fund just the Pentagon and therefore ensuring that military members continue to get their paychecks. I guess what are any of the sticking points on this one, the chances of its success, but also how piecemeal deals like that are possible? This is something we could see more of as airports continue to be impacted, TSA, FAA, things like that.
Yeah, this could be the beginning of a new strategy for GOP Senate leader John Thune. This is the first time he is actually shaking up his strategy whatsoever by putting this individual funding bill on the floor that would fund the Defense Department, which includes, of course, military pay. And the thinking among Republicans is that this is going to create a lot of pressure for Democrats because voting against military pay is not necessarily a good look, right? And they really want to shake some Democrats loose and show some sort of momentum in this very stalled process. However, in talking to Democrats yesterday, they're very worried about undermining their negotiating hand and giving up some of their leverage if they show they are willing to fund the government on a piecemeal basis. So many of them keeping their cards close to the vest or saying outright they are not planning to vote for this bill today. So we are not expecting it to pass. But of course, we are going to be watching that vote count very closely to see any signs of movement, Savannah.
All right, Mel, thank you very much. Well, in the Middle East, the fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is holding for now. Hamas handed over the remains of 2 more hostages yesterday. They say they are complying with the agreement and handing over any bodies they can reach in the rubble after 2 years of war in Gaza. But Israel says they are cutting aid going into the enclave because of this delay on returning the rest of the remains. President Trump said he would consider allowing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to resume military action in Gaza if Hamas refuses to hold up its end of the ceasefire deal. But as of yesterday, the State Department's view is that the deal has not been violated by Hamas's delay in releasing hostage remains. All parties involved in the peace plan had previously agreed it was unlikely all would be returned in the 72-hour window that had begun on Monday, and a plan would be in place to find them in the future. For more on this, let's bring in NBC News International correspondent Matt Bradley, who is in Tel Aviv with the latest. Matt, good morning. So first, just elaborate on this a bit for us. Hamas said it has returned all the hostage remains it can recover, at least at this point, it sounds like. We understand now that that's something that all parties did anticipate would happen. Though it is this sticking point, it appears to be putting the ceasefire at risk. The day that this was all unfolding, Monday in the Middle East, we were asking you because the families of hostages were calling this sort of breach of this peace plan. Tell us the latest.
Not just the families, Savannah, but also the Minister of Defense have been describing it this way. Lots of high-level officials here in Israel have been saying that this is a breach of the terms of that very sensitive treaty. But the fact is that, as you mentioned, this had all been telegraphed before. Everybody who was involved in this knew, because Hamas had told them that they were going to struggle to recover these bodies. But let me just recap what we've had so far. On Monday, the first day when we saw those 20 hostages, living hostages released, there were 4 bodies. The following day, Tuesday, there were another 4 bodies. Last night, there were 2 bodies. But in the past couple of days, it's been determined that at least one of those bodies, of the 10, was not actually one of the hostages. The Israelis confirmed that. So now we're in this situation where there's public protest, anger about how Hamas hasn't been abiding by the deal. But a lot of people behind closed doors, as you mentioned, American officials and others, knew that all of this was going to happen. So there's been a lot of talk about an international group that could go in and help exhume some of these bodies. But this is going to be a complicated and dangerous effort. Gaza lies in ruins. The ceasefire is tenuous. Violence could break out at any moment and continues to be seen in isolated cases throughout the Gaza Strip. So recovering the rest of these bodies, just abiding by the terms of this treaty, could be a very, very difficult process.
Matt, in exchange for the remains of hostages, the ones that Israel has received so far, Israel has then returned the bodies of 45 Palestinian victims to Gaza earlier this week. The head of forensic medicine in Gaza talked to NBC News about the condition of those victims. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Savannah, we just heard that there were another 30 bodies. That brings the number to 120 total of Palestinian bodies that have been returned to the Gaza Strip. Curiously enough, as you mentioned, we've heard reports that all of these bodies, or each of these bodies, had either a finger or a toe cut off. Now, we haven't heard much in the way of why. It would probably stand to reason that this was being used by the Israelis as some sort of way to keep records and identification of these bodies for themselves, DNA, basically organic matter that they can use to keep track of who they've had in custody. But it's a grisly bit of business, and it's something that has already upset the Palestinians.
Matt, let's talk more about aid. The United Nations said they've faced some setbacks to the implementation of their aid delivery program in Gaza. I mentioned Israel purposefully cutting off some of that aid as they see this breach by Hamas with not returning the rest of the remains of hostages. What is the latest on the ground in Gaza?
Yeah, it's a great question, Savannah. I mean, the fact is that actually most of those threats so far have gone unheeded. The Rafah crossing, it sounds like, is continuing to open, despite threats that they would keep it closed because they weren't getting those bodies. They have now gone back on what they said, on what the Israelis had said, that they were going to cut in half the number of trucks that were allowed each day into the Gaza Strip. Now it looks as though they're back up to 600 trucks a day. But really, when we're talking about aid getting in, there are still some very substantial restrictions in the way of getting the aid into the Gaza Strip. And because of that, there is still a dire humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Aid has been flowing in at much higher levels than before. And crucially, people in Gaza are being able to access aid from various aid points. So this has become a real issue that has not been resolved in just the past couple of days.
All right. Matt Bradley, thank you, as always, for your reporting from Tel Aviv. Well, the conservative-leaning Supreme Court appears willing to weaken a key part of this landmark Voting Rights Act that prevents racial discrimination in voting. The case, which was heard by the justices just yesterday, challenges a congressional map in Louisiana. It was adopted just in 2024 to create 2 majority black districts out of the 6 in total. A ruling in this case could further undermine the Voting Rights Act and possibly decide which party controls the House of Representatives. We have NBC News senior Supreme Court reporter Lawrence Hurley with us, as well as our legal analyst Angela Sanadella here on set to join us to talk more about this. Good morning to both of you. Lawrence, I will start with you just for some background here. Help us understand what this case is about and tell us what we've heard so far from justices in their reaction to arguments that suggests, on the conservative side at least, they're leaning toward weakening this act.
Well, one way of looking at all of this is that it's a kind of a legal argument embraced by conservatives that the Constitution is completely colorblind, including provisions that were enacted after the Civil War specifically to address race. Namely the 14th, 15th Amendment aimed to give equal rights and allow black former slaves to be able to vote. So that's the kind of underlying kind of argument here. And we already have a conservative majority Supreme Court that has shown openness to those types of arguments, as in the ruling a couple of years ago where they ended affirmative action in college admissions. So this case is really about applying all of those theories to the Voting Rights Act, which was enacted specifically to help black people in the South get equal rights and the right to vote. So, and we saw during the arguments that the court is receptive to those arguments, although there's lots of different kind of theories being thrown around. So we don't know exactly how the court is going to rule, but it seems clear that in some form the court's probably going to weaken the Voting Rights Act again.
Angela, let's bring you in here. Can you just kind of give us your assessment of the arguments on both sides here and which you think presents a stronger case?
So look, jumping on what Lauren said, anytime you have to argue in front of the Supreme Court, and especially this court, that a race-based classification sorting system that is ordered by a court is constitutional, it is an uphill battle. Because the assumption is that the Constitution is colorblind. So anytime you present that sort of argument, the burden is on you. But in terms of what is a stronger or weaker argument, it truly depends on what your view is of the status of racial discrimination in this country. So if you were to agree with the white plaintiffs, Louisiana, the Department of Justice here, then you would have to assume that voter dilution towards minorities, racial discrimination toward minority voters, really doesn't exist today. And so as a result, it's really racial discrimination to have this sort of status quo, the Voting Rights Act. But if you believe, as the NAACP put forth, that there still is this vast racial discrimination out there and that any sort of gutting of this Section 2 would return us immediately to a state of segregated voting and segregated minority representation, then that is obviously the stronger argument. So that is how I would present that.
All right. Lawrence, what's actually at stake here? Not just for Louisiana, but for the whole country. How could implications be felt further?
Yeah, I mean, there are sort of political, obviously, implications, and also, you know, the issue with minority representation, which is that if the court somehow rules that you can't use race to draw new maps after they've been found to not comply with the Voting Rights Act, it basically doesn't give states much incentive to draw majority-minority districts at all. And, you know, some analysts think that this will lead to a big decline in the number of Black and Latinos who have elected offices all around the country, not just in Congress, but also in state legislatures. So that could be a big repercussion. And then also on the political side, obviously, if the court rules quickly, and rules in favor of Louisiana, Louisiana can draw a new map ahead of the 2026 midterms, potentially. And other states that have similar issues with majority-minority districts, especially in the South, might try to do the same thing. And, you know, with the elections being so tight in the House of Representatives recently, that could actually decide the outcome.
Angela, how does this move forward? What do we expect to hear when?
So we're not sure when the Supreme Court will make a decision on this. That can happen really at any time. But in terms of moving forward, the implications, as Lauren said, are widespread, not just because this is Supreme Court precedent, not just at the congressional level, at the state level, maybe even at school boards. We very well might see greatly reduced representation if the Voting Rights Act here is gutted.
All right. Angela and Lawrence, thank you both very much. Appreciate us walking us through that dense one. All right, let's start with the fact that it feels a lot more like fall today in the Northeast when we get to weather. A chilly breeze from Maine to North Carolina is keeping temperatures below average. You are certainly feeling it here in New York. Angie, good morning.
Yep, I got my pants, I got my long sleeves on today, Savannah, because finally it is feeling like fall for some of us. Not everybody, but you are waking up to a bit of a chill across parts of the Northeast. Notice these frost advisories, freeze watches, freeze warnings that are in effect kind of stretching across this area. That's because temperatures into the 40s for most of us. You can see some like places like Buffalo dipping down into those upper 30s. We've got low 40s across Pennsylvania, 44 degrees in Bridgeport. Saranac Lake checking in at just 30 degrees. So we're going to continue to see these temperatures remain chilly here over the next basically couple of days. Upper 50s in New York. Wilmington ends up at 71 degrees. And you can see these temperatures across the midsection of the country, a whole different story. That is where it's continuing to feel like summer. So you dealt with it yesterday across this region. You've got the 80s on tap again in places like Omaha, Oklahoma City, San Angelo, Paducah, even sitting at 80 degrees. Out west, a different story. It's kind of a sandwich of chilly temperatures on each of the coasts, and then that warmer air settles into the middle. As we get through the day tomorrow, more of the same. Honestly, not a whole lot of change there. We're going to continue to see those upper 80s for Dallas, mid-60s for Norfolk, upper 50s for Flagstaff. Big picture look into next week. I think a lot of people will say, where is fall for a little bit? We're still going to be looking at low 80s in Indianapolis by Saturday, but notice that change as we get into Sunday. It's low 60s. Similar story in New York City. We'll kind of flirt with those upper 60s on Sunday, but Monday and even Saturday, we're into the mid 60s. So feeling a little bit more like fall. 80s still for Saturday and Sunday in Charlotte. That's going to stay with us. Part of the reason we're going to see some cooler air is because of this system you're watching right here. It's going to usher in some of those chillier temperatures on the backside of it, but not before we have to deal with a little bit of rain. And that's going to emerge out of the Rockies today. So upper parts of the upper Midwest, the northern plains, you'll deal with the rain today. Tomorrow, much of that starts to quiet down. And then even as we get into Saturday, we'll see that shifting east. And there will be a little rain on the docket for the weekend for some folks across the Midwest.
Remember yesterday I wore a fur-lined coat. Today I wore no coat.
Savannah, you gotta call me in the morning.
I do. I'm just like, I don't know, thinking about yesterday. When I'm leaving, that's what I do.
Angie
which I
wear?
Obviously, the least I could do is open the app. And I'm just like, warm yesterday, right? No coat.
Right. I know you and everybody else around here.
All right.
It's the season.
I'll see you in an hour. Got it.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.